Take Back Your Health Now, Episode 23. You're listening to the Take Back Your Health Now podcast, the show that interviews the top doctors, athletes, trainers, and entrepreneurs to help you find the holy grail of health. Now here's your host, Dr. Dan Margolin.
Hi, this is Dr. Dan Margolin with another segment of Take Back Your Health Now, where we pull out all the stops in search of health's holy grail. We are extremely excited to have Dr. Linda Lagemann. She's a PhD, a clinical psychologist for 23 years, and multi-award-winning professor from UCSF. She currently studies trends in psychiatry and psychology and their impact on public health. After observing the mental health field had become dominated by psychiatric labels and drugs that were doing more harm than help, she gave up practicing psychology and moved to D.C. to work on legislative reforms of the field. Dr. Lagemann is a frequent guest on radio programs across the country and was featured in the independent film The Big Lie, American Addict 2. She writes about the current state of the mental health field and potential harmful emerging trends to watch out for. Dr. Lagemann, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here and have this conversation.
And we're really excited to have you. So let's just jump right in. So, Dr. Lagemann, what actually made, like you were in private practice for quite some time in psychology. What made you leave practice?
You know, I just reached a tipping point where over those years, I saw more and more regular people coming in on psychiatric drugs already and doing worse for it. And it was just the point of, my office was in the financial district in San Francisco, and I worked with a lot of very high-powered people at the top of their game. And to have people like that, regular people, accomplished coming in on psychiatric medication or thinking that they need to medicate something, and one too many parent telling me that their child was just labeled with ADHD and they need to put them on, a stimulant, and they really don't want to, but they have to because that's what's needed.
Right.
Anyway, people were doing worse and worse, and it was like having another person in my office telling me how they couldn't feel anything. I had here's one of the things, a young father, he had so much joy in his two little boys, and then he went on an antidepressant, and he said he was just going through the motions. Like he would play with them, but he wasn't even there. He didn't have any feelings for them.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So it almost like he was disassociated from who he was before.
That's exactly what it was. And that
so you were doing this for 23 years. So clearly, it couldn't have been like one situation you saw this. I mean, this must have been something you saw over and over again. It just built up. Is that correct?
Yes, it built up. And it's one of those things and I think this is also the case with the population at large. This has been a gradual progression of the taking over of, people's mental and emotional and spiritual struggles. This has gradually been taken over by the psychiatric pharmaceutical industry. And so I think all of us have that struggle because it wasn't a dramatic shift where, if 20 years ago somebody had told us that today a quarter of the population would be on a psychiatric drug, we wouldn't have believed it. But that's actually a fact right now.
It's that high? Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the latest figures. That's from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and IMS Health. It's like the largest data analytics of healthcare transactions. Yeah,
You're saying 25% of people are on those meds. Holy mackerel. I had no idea. It was that high.
Yeah, technically it's 24.7% of the American population is on a psychiatric medication. Okay,
wow.
So
Dr. let me just take me back for 1 second. So when you first 23 years ago or 24 years ago, when you were a young student or looking to become a psychologist and stuff like that, what were your aspirations? What were you looking for? And I got how it sort of turned out, but was there who were you back then?
Well, the same. I mean, I was looking for the tools to help people with their struggles in life. That's the bottom. That's just the simplicity of it. It's like,
sure.
Why do people do things against their better judgment that actually cause them pain, and how to help them out of that?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. And I obviously jump right in then. Tell us what you found.
Just finished a thought on this thing of how, so right now it is a fact that, a quarter of the population is on psychiatric drugs. What I was saying is, 20 years ago, if we had been told that would be the case today, nobody would have believed it. But because it's so outrageous. But if, it's just gradually one person, another person gets put on drugs, it gets absorbed, and it's like on sitcoms, and it's just TV commercials for 18 years have been bombarding us with, everything we experience and suffer from in life needs a pill. And it's really embedded in our culture now and taken for granted.
It's like boiling a frog, right? I mean, you just start with the water, just slowly warm it up until nobody realizes what's going on.
That's exactly
So what are some of the effects that these drugs have on our population?
Well, every psychiatric drug disables parts of the brain. That's the bottom line. Every psychiatric drug functions by cutting communication in parts of the brain. And the frontal lobe, particularly, which is where our higher functions are. That's, your thinking, your feelings for others, your social connections. And then there are various worse, kind of adverse effects, like, say, the antidepressants, because those have been so easy to sell to people. It's very easy with marketing to make people think that when they feel down, that they need a pill, that it's a mental illness.
It's an easy solution.
Yeah, and that was the other thing that I noticed, when I had a practice before, that what people used to take and do to help themselves, like exercise. Like if somebody's depressed, truly the single best treatment is exercise. And that's, by study. And then after that, is volunteering, help somebody else, learn something new,
Wow.
these kinds of things. And nutrition, of course. But with so many years of all this advertising of pills, I remember in my practice when I would say to somebody, okay, well, let's get you, like exercising. They're like, people would actually say to me, can't I just take a pill?
Oh my God. Well, I remember, growing up in New York City, my grandmother, God bless her soul, I remember she would trade Valium with one of my uncles, like left and right. Xanax, you want a Xanax? You want a Valium? I mean, it was like they were eating candy and stuff. So I remember that. And God bless them, they were a little wacky. So I remember thinking, that can't be the answer. I mean, it didn't seem like it was really helping them out particularly. Yeah. But
that was the drug those days, and then now it's the antidepressants and actually, shockingly, the antipsychotics. Like Abilify is an antipsychotic that's marketed on TV to add on if your antidepressant isn't working for you. Abilify.
What is the difference? Like what is the difference? Explain to us the difference between the two.
Well, it's different of the brain chemicals that are called neurotransmitters, but it's the brain chemicals that they have the primary effect on.
Okay.
So antidepressants, let's go with those because those are so common now. And antidepressants affect serotonin. I think people have heard that. There's a lot of things in the media that were put there to sell these drugs, like talking about depression as a problem with serotonin. And those antidepressants, I don't know if people know, but they're most of them like Prozac and Celexa and Paxil. They're called SSRIs.
Right.
The category of antidepressants, which are the main ones, and that's relating to serotonin. It actually is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and reuptake meaning reabsorption in the system.
I mean, is there a blood test that shows that those levels are low and that's why they need that medication? Or is there some sort of blood test to show that?
No, there's not. And it's that whole idea that was used for marketing, that there was a chemical imbalance, is literally just a marketing line that never came out of science. Never. It was developed by Prozac, by Eli Lilly, the maker of Prozac, and they are the ones, before releasing Prozac, they put things in the media about depression being caused by a chemical imbalance.
Okay.
And then after that got kind of in the media and related to serotonin, then they released Prozac as the answer. Oh, here's an antidepressant that affects serotonin.
So it was a giant PR campaign that actually had no real backing in terms of scientific data. Like if you have diabetes, obviously, and your glucose is, wherever it is, you can measure that.
That's right.
But you're saying there's no such measure like that.
No, that is the key thing. So there's a really fundamental difference between medical diagnoses, like let's say diabetes, and psychiatric diagnoses. Medical diagnoses have a series of tests, like objective medical tests, objective science that can be applied to know if you have it or don't have it. Psychiatric diagnoses, every single one of them, which most people don't know, even people in the field don't know, those are voted on. There's a group that the American Psychiatric forms. It's a work group for the diagnostic manual. And they get together and they argue and say, we'll include this criteria, we'll include that. And they vote on diagnoses. And the other thing to know is
how is that even possible, though? I mean, how you would think that, I don't, it's amazing. I've heard this before. It just baffles me. You're talking about, many, many millions of people being affected, and you're talking about something that's to some degree, I hate to say disguised as, but disguised as a science. So you're saying that it's like voting on, I don't know, like let's vote that gravity didn't exist or something like that.
Right, and like when you talk about affecting millions of people, the last version of the diagnostic manual, the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that the American Psychiatric Association puts out, the most recent version, the work group for mood disorders voted to remove, basically to include grieving in the diagnosis for depression. So it used to be that if somebody's, husband or child died within the last month, you couldn't diagnose them as depressed because it was recognized naturally they are grieving. And that's why they don't have an appetite, and that's why they don't feel like life is, so fun anymore. But those
seems like that would be a natural human response to losing somebody that you loved.
Right, and a necessary one. But they voted to remove what was called the bereavement exclusion to diagnose depression. So therefore, people whose child or spouse or something just died can now be diagnosed with major depression. The significance of this is then they get medicated. And just so it's clear, those people who vote, that work group on mood disorders, 100% of them had direct financial ties with the pharmaceutical companies that make the antidepressants. So they just broadened the definition of depression to include millions more people, thus increasing their profits tremendously.
So is this what this is about? Is this a financial game? Is it that we can come up with these labels so we can actually sell more of our product? I mean, is that really what this is coming down to?
It totally is. It's about money and it's about control. There are billions of dollars involved just in the ADHD drugs, the attention deficit hyperactivity.
Yes.
Those drugs, as of last 2015, that was $13 billion annually in sales. And that is a diagnosis that was made up.
That was made up as well. Well, I tell you, just something, an observation I had. Years ago, I know that the United States was rated number one for a long time in terms of its education and the level that they were putting out. And I saw something a few months ago where it's way down. I mean, it's almost like down at the bottom. And I remember thinking, listen, if they found this disease that was really stopping people from being able to learn things and all that kind of thing. Once they found that and they had a solution to it, you would think that actually the scores would go through the roof, and yet it seems like it went through the bottom. So that always bothered me. What do you have to say about that?
Oh, wow. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. That's the ADHD drugs. They do quiet kids down. They sedate them. it basically it stops spontaneous behavior. It kind of takes the life out of kids. If you talk to kids who are
Wow.
on them, they don't like it at all. It makes them feel dead. But it does not increase their test scores. There was a huge study done in Canada. It was over an 8-year period of time. It was either 8 years with 11,000 kids, or it was 11 years with 8,000 kids. But it was a huge study, long term. And
Hmm.
to their surprise, they found that the kids on the ADHD drugs actually had higher dropout rates, lower math scores, and more depression. Those are the only three things those were the three markers they were looking at. And it was a really
So,
good study because it was kind of naturalistic. It was one whole region. I don't know what you call them in Canada, but like one area that had approved the ADHD drugs for in the social medicine system, and the other that did not. So they had kids that were equally diagnosed ADHD, but some got medicated in one region, and in the other region there was no medication, and so they compared them. And that's how they got those.
wow, wow.
Yeah,
Now I could see from a teacher's perspective the child quieting down so that they had maybe, they could get on with whatever they were trying to get on with. But from the student's perspective, for what you're saying, I mean, why would you put your children on those kind of things? Then that's really not something that sounds like it's helping. What? So how does this work? Like, how? Explain to me. Here's what I don't understand too. A couple of things. So one, I mean, I've had people say to me, because I've seen even in my own practice when years ago I sent a patient who was troubled to a psychiatrist, and 6 months later, this woman was a head executive, very sweet lady. Really, I'd formed a great friendship with her, and she came to me and said, "Hey, Dan, do you know I'm having some problems? Do you know anybody?" And I said, this was in Princeton. I sent her to a psychiatrist, and 6 months later, she came into my office, and she was twitching and almost curled up in a ball. I mean, I was totally a different person to the point, honestly, that I got so upset about it. I called the psychiatrist myself from the office with her there. Okay, and I actually called him and I said, "Hey, listen, I've got this patient. She's your patient. And I'm observing a complete deterioration. I mean, she is just curled up in a ball. And I swear to God, he said, yeah, she's like Dom DeLuise now. Dom DeLuise was this sort of like comedian. And it was so shocking to me
oh my
that
God.
I'm telling you, it was my first experience. I was young in practice, and she ended up committing suicide actually
Oh my
months
God.
after that. And it's
Yeah,
something that I've always had some sort of guilt for. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So
yeah,
what?
yeah.
Tell me about like
Wow.
how why is that? Why you hear about all these suicides, you hear about all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Why is this?
Oh, wow. I mean, what you just described, it's really sad. It's not uncommon. Um, so the antidepressants, which sounds like she was put on, what they do is they're affecting the level of serotonin artificially. They make it seem like there's an extra serotonin. And so the brain tries to adapt and it starts to shut down. It recognizes, oh, wow, our serotonin is not being reabsorbed, because remember I said it's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So it inhibits the reabsorption. So
Right.
there's more serotonin floating around, it's not being reabsorbed. And
Now,
the brain,
just stop for 1 second. So let me just ask you one question. Then when I tell this to people, because I've noticed this over the years, they say, and this is what I've gotten back, not so much on the long term, but on people that are on it short term, they say that for the first few weeks they have seen people do better. Is that why? Because the serotonin levels actually jump because of that? Is that
there's a there's an with those drugs there's an activation uh, part that happens. Like now, some people that activation is one of the adverse effects. It's they feel uh, really uncomfortable and jumpy, you know. But there is an activation like that can happen temporarily.
okay?
But yes, so the first couple weeks, maybe their person feels more energy or activation is the best I can describe it. And then, right, then the brain tries to adapt and get its normal back. And it says, whoa, we have so much serotonin. This isn't normal. Let's shut down our own production of serotonin. So it starts shutting down, decreasing production of that neurotransmitter.
Oh
And
my God! Wow!
and
Wow!
then the person feels worse. And then they go back to the doc, and say, oh, my antidepressant isn't working anymore. And the doctor says, okay, take more, or take another one. We'll add another pill. And then the brain does the same thing. It says, oh, wow, we have to readjust now. So we'll close off more production. Or if it gets bad enough, then the brain will say, you know what, we don't need all these receptor sites because we've got too much serotonin. Let's shut down some of the receptor sites, and they'll atrophy receptor sites in the brain. And there's all this, then more drugs, different drugs, and then the person may try to come off of them. This is why people have such a hard time coming off of antidepressants. And then, because when they start to come off it, now they actually have a chemical imbalance that was created by the drug, and they don't have the natural, what their body used to produce, their brain used to produce, and they feel profoundly depressed. Now, what happens in the current system is they get told, oh, see, this is genetic. You're just one of those people. It's chronic depression. You need to stay on the antidepressant for the rest of your life. But that's not the case. It's the drug caused a chemical imbalance, and it needs a way more gradual tapering off than any doc recommends in order for the brain.
Linda, you're blowing me away. I'm going to tell you a quick story of a patient. I had a patient. She came in with plantar fasciitis, which is basically heel pain, and she had been put on these medicines, actually psychiatric medicines, about 3 years early for her foot pain. Okay, for her foot pain.
Yeah.
So she came in, and it was clearly what's called plantar fasciitis, or an inflammation on the tendon. We healed it with cortisone injections, orthotic, and within weeks it was gone, and she was completely out of foot pain. And I wrote a note to her doctors that said, hey, listen, she's out of foot pain. She actually doesn't need those medicines. And what came back to me is, listen, she cannot ever come off of those, or the consequences could be that she dies. And I didn't understand. I'm like, wait a second. Why would you put somebody on something for a foot pain that potentially could kill them? I didn't even understand how it could, because I just thought, you know what, you're taking an aspirin, like just stop taking the aspirin. But what you're saying to me is they created with this situation a chronic condition where the receptors are gone. Are these receptors gone forever, or they come back, or when do they come back?
Yeah, there's mixed studies on that. Some studies say that over time that the brain will heal and it can come back, and then others say that it's permanent. So there's been mixed things on that. I wouldn't mess with it, though. But back to the suicides, because when somebody tries to come off it and they get like profoundly worse, that's often a time where people kill themselves or get violent. The other thing is the drugs, just even staying on it, there's all the adverse effects, and the person is disconnected from loved ones. It's like it cuts people off from their connection with the world and their own self. And so they don't care anymore about themselves or others. And that's where you can get suicide, like the first woman that you mentioned. And that is like we've had a rise in suicides. Our suicide rate is going up and up and up. And so is our SSI, Social Security disability for mental illness. And, kind of a point you made earlier, it's like, yeah, if we had found the cures for these things, we should be the happiest, healthiest country around, because we are definitely the most medicated country in the world. And we are not. We have like climbing mental illness disability rates that parallel graph the climb in the psychiatric medications on the market.
I mean, Linda, you could see it sometimes just walking in the street. I mean, you just see, there may be other factors, the economy or all those kind of things, but you see it in people's faces. There's just it just seems like an overall depression or something about them and stuff. So when you're looking at depression itself, like let's put the medicines to the side. Is it a chronic condition overall? Is it something like without the medicine? How is that go into?
And so depression, actually, the psychiatric journals back in the 40s and 50s, I have a whole paper about this. Back in the 40s, 50s, the psychiatric journals talked about depression as something that got better by itself. It didn't really need any treatment. People got depressed, but then it sort of self-corrected. Then
this is in their own journals.
Their own journals. Then there was the antidepressants. The first kind of antidepressants were going to come on the market, And the head of the National Institute of Mental Health at the time said, well, we know that depression gets better by itself, but maybe the antidepressants will shorten the duration of the episode. And so that was the hope, that antidepressants would shorten the episode. Then they started, using antidepressants, and there were articles. Some psychiatrists started printing articles, like case studies, saying, hey, I think this made the person worse because when I took them off of the medication, they got worse. And there were a number of articles like that in the 50s, 60s or so,
Right.
something like that. And then there started being articles with people, putting out the hypothesis that the antidepressants were causing a chronic condition. They actually wrote about this. And then you get to like the 90s, and all of a sudden, in the journals, depression is referred to as, like a matter of fact, as a chronic condition. It didn't used to be a chronic condition.
Wow.
Yeah, but antidepressants, like I think 10% of the population is on an antidepressant now. A quarter of the population is on a psychiatric drug, but I think it's 10% that's on an antidepressant. And
Dr. Lagemann, this is one of the most powerful podcasts I think I've ever done, because it's it's just so shocking, so goes to the core of, what we've been told. And it's almost like I'm sitting here going, wow, I've studied these things over the years, and I've looked at it, and I've had some understanding of it. And like I said, I've had my own interactions where we've referred patients and things didn't make sense. And I've pulled away from that by a long shot, but I didn't realize the depth of it. I absolutely did not realize that these things were creating a chronic situation. I thought that, maybe they were making people worse, but if they came off of it, that there would be some ability to, in other words, you weren't created. So this is like giving you a diabetic medicine that if you're not diabetic, it's going to make you diabetic.
Right.
It's horrible. It's horrible.
And I want to make sure, just so, because I'm talking about things like how they vote on the diagnoses and all, but I do want to make sure that people, that I'm not misinterpreted, that people do have very real struggles, very real mental, emotional, and spiritual struggles. And there are, kids that are very hyper and, maybe much more so than the average range. The key point, though, is that these are not medical conditions, and drugging them doesn't help. Like with kids, you could give them heroin and it would also quiet them down, but they're not going to learn anything. Like you don't get control of yourself and learn. The other thing is, we are so much more able than all of this, 18 years of direct-to-consumer advertising has made us think. Like, we've been driven down and told that everything's out of our control, it's chemical, it's genetic, you have no power over this, you have to get a pill. And the fact is, we are so much more able, and that's what actually the placebo effect, when somebody takes a sugar pill and they feel better, what's
Sure.
actually going on, actually that's part of the reason too, when sometimes people say, no, my antidepressant really helps me. It's like, I don't doubt them, because 70% of people taking a sugar pill will report the same thing with the same conviction. Like, they will feel better. And that's where we get to the heart of things, of, our health and, taking back our health, which is our own control over our condition. When a sugar pill, a placebo works, what's actually happening? What's happening is the person made a decision that they were going to, be less anxious, be less depressed, be able to sit and study and focus, and they made that be true. They made it happen.
Wow. Our whole podcast is In Search of Health's Holy Grail. And this concept, and some of the experts many of the experts, if not almost all of them, have sort of come to the same conclusion that, a lot of it is viewpoint, and it's persistence, and it's just really searching out some of the more natural remedies, if you would. If I were to ask you, Linda, maybe you did answer this, but, we're in search of health's Holy Grail. What in this area would you say is the Holy Grail of health?
Somebody taking their own responsibility for their condition. And once somebody takes responsibility, like, okay, I'm feeling depressed, it's not chemicals, it's not outside of me, then what do? Well, I better get in action, I better exercise, I better, Like maybe if I get my mind off my own self and go help somebody else, that's always, you feel better when you help somebody.
Wow.
But control, it's our own responsibility and control, and our own ability, even if we get knocked off, balance with something where we get depressed or anxious, we have the ability to get it back on track. Our own self.
Powerful. Powerful.
Yeah.
Linda, let me ask you one last question. So what about, let's say, our children? So we have a child that, let's say, the teacher comes to us and says, hey, this kid has ADHD or he's hyper or something. How do we, from your viewpoint now, how do we handle that?
Well, awareness. I mean, we're looking at this billion-dollar industry. Like I mentioned, the ADHD drugs, $13 billion annually. You got to look at who's getting rich and who's getting hurt. And it's going to be grassroots awareness. When parents have true information, it will naturally lead to them not being consumers of that kind of thing. So with the schools saying this, they've been bombarded by, little education seminars to identify ADHD, but they do not know what they're talking about. I can tell you multiple examples I've had of parents telling me the teacher said their kid had ADHD because they weren't paying attention, and they were pressuring the parents to put their kid on a stimulant, these are amphetamines basically. But in 3 of these situations, the child turned out to be having seizures where they
oh
were,
my God.
Yeah, right. So everybody now, because of all of this psychiatric lingo that we're bombarded with, everybody thinks they're a diagnostician, and it's, all you have to identify, you just look and see, oh, a kid's not paying attention. Obviously, that's ADHD. Or, oh, a kid's hyper. Obviously, it's ADHD. Inattention can be from so many things, including seizures. Hyperactivity, so many things, including like playground concussions, sleep deprivation, iron deficiency, nutritional, allergies, all kinds of things.
Sure. Wow, Linda, this was an incredibly, incredibly powerful podcast. Listen, if people want to find out more about you, get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Well, my website is drlagemann.com. It's drlagemann.com. And I've got my contact info there. I'm always happy to, be in touch with people. Yeah.
Dr. Linda Lagemann, thank you so much for joining us. Greatly, greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
This episode is sponsored by New Jersey Foot and Ankle Center in Oradell, New Jersey. Remember, when you have a foot problem, you've got a foot doctor in the family. Weekend and evening appointments are available. Call us at 201-261-9445. Once again, that's 201-261-9445. Thanks for listening. Check out the show notes over at drdanspeaks.com. If you're loving the show, head over to iTunes and leave us a review, and we'll catch you next time. This episode is brought to you by Slate Media Productions. Provided by, for more information, Randy Ramos Jr. Slate Media to see and hear more of his work, visit randyramosjr.com.